The only place I could afford was a one-bedroom apartment inside a split-level house, rented out by this older couple who lived upstairs. They were quiet, polite, and mostly kept to themselves. The place had a private entrance on the side of the house and my own access to the basement, which was part of the lease. I didn't think I'd need it much, just for storage. But that changed quick. A week after I moved in, my water heater stopped working. The landlord told me to head down to the basement and flip the switch on the breaker box just in case it had tripped. Now, this basement was nothing like the clean, finished ones you see on Zillow. It was cold, concrete, and the stairs creaked like they hadn't been stepped on in years. The air smelled musty and sharp, like rust and wet cardboard. I flicked the light switch on, but only one dim bulb came on, way in the back. The rest of the basement was swallowed in shadow. I had to use my phone's flashlight just to find the breaker panel. I flipped the switch. Water heater hummed back to life. Easy fix. But as I turned to head back upstairs, I noticed something strange. There was a second door under the staircase. I hadn't seen it before. It was small, maybe 4 feet high, and painted the same gray as the concrete walls. But what made it stand out was the padlock. It wasn't some flimsy lock either. This thing looked old, heavy, and serious. I stared at it for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the distant rumble of pipes and the buzz of the single light bulb overhead. I left it alone. At first. Over the next few weeks, I kept noticing weird things. Small things, like I'd come home from work and find the basement light on, even though I was sure I turned it off. Or I'd hear faint thuds from down there in the middle of the night. At first, I figured it was just the old house settling. Maybe pipes, maybe raccoons. But then one night around 2 a.m., I heard a sound that froze me. Knocking. Not like something fell over. This was a steady, deliberate knock. 3 beats. Paused. Then again. And it was coming from under the floor. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the basement door. My hand hesitated on the knob. I told myself not to open it. I told myself I was imagining things, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. The stairs creaked louder than usual as I crept down. The air felt colder than usual too, like stepping into a freezer. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Silence. I swung my light around and froze it on the little locked door. It was open. The lock was still dangling from the latch, but the door itself was cracked just an inch. I didn't open it. I just stood there staring. I felt like something was watching me from the crack, just out of view. I turned and bolted up the stairs, locked the door, put a chair in front of it. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called the landlord, asked him if he'd been in the basement. He said no. I asked about the locked door. He got quiet, then said, "That part's sealed, there's nothing back there." "But the lock was open," I said. He paused, then said, "Must have been a mistake. I'll come check it later." But he never did. 3 days later, I was woken up by a loud bang coming from the basement again. But this time it wasn't knocking. It was like something slamming against wood, repeatedly. I grabbed my phone, opened the voice recorder, and crept halfway down the stairs. I didn't dare go all the way, but I could hear it, the sound of something scratching on wood. Then silence. Then that knocking again. This time it sounded closer. I backed up, locked the door again, and went back to bed. The next day, I replayed the audio for a friend. He asked if it was a prank. I told him no. He asked what was behind the little door. I didn't know, but I had to find out. That night I waited until around midnight. I brought a crowbar, a flashlight, and my phone camera on record. The basement light was already on when I opened the door. I stepped down slowly, every stair groaning. The air was damp and sour. The small door under the stairs was wide open this time. The lock, gone. I crouched and aimed my flashlight inside. It wasn't a room. It was more like a tunnel. Dirt walls, wooden beams, and just enough room to crawl. I should have left it alone. But I got down and started crawling. It smelled awful, like mold and something dead. After maybe 10 feet, the tunnel opened up into a small dugout space, like a bunker. There were objects, a broken chair, a cracked mirror, a rusted metal chain bolted into the floor, and something else. A journal. It was soaked and falling apart, but I flipped through a few pages. The handwriting was shaky, like a child's. One page just said, "He keeps them here, when they don't listen." I heard a breath, behind me. Not mine. I spun around and flashed the light. Nothing. But the tunnel entrance was gone. I was sealed in. I panicked, crawling and clawing at the dirt, pushing until finally, I saw light. The tunnel had somehow collapsed slightly, but I squeezed through. I didn't look back. I left the basement door open that night, just in case whatever was down there wanted out. I wanted it gone. The next morning, the door under the stairs was shut tight, padlocked. Same as before. I moved out the next week. The landlords never asked why. I never brought it up. But to this day, I still wonder what else was behind that door. Who wrote that journal? And how many times they were kept until they listened. I haven't stepped into a basement since, and I never will again.
I moved into that basement unit because it was cheap, not because it was comfortable. And though the ceilings were barely above my head, and the single window faced a wall of dirt and snow in the driveway, I told myself it was temporary, even as I noticed from the first week that the apartment across the hall, a red door with peeling paint marked "To Be," never opened, never made a sound, and yet sometimes I'd swear I heard shuffling behind it when I walked by, or saw the edge of a shadow slip out of the peephole glass before quickly vanishing back behind the wood, which I convinced myself was just the kind of paranoia that comes from living too close to old, creaking plumbing and thin walls in a town where winter never seems to end. But then one night I came home to find an envelope, yellowed, no stamp, no name, wedged into that red doorframe. And though I didn't touch it, it was gone the next morning, like it had never been there. And over the next few days I began noticing a low thudding from the unit across from mine at night, followed by a rotten smell that clung to the hallway. And when I finally knocked on that door out of frustration, something on the other side whispered back at me. Not a voice exactly, but the texture of one, like someone shaping breath into soft words right against the wood. And even though the landlord never answered my calls and never returned my texts, I couldn't let it go. Because the next night someone slipped a black and white photo under my door, one that showed a young girl sitting on a basement floor with her hands tied in front of her, and what looked like a man standing just out of the light behind her. Just a shape in the shadow, no face, just watching. I wanted to leave. I really did. But there was a pull I can't explain. Something about the stillness behind that door that made my thoughts race every time I walked past it. And so after one especially long night where I kept hearing footsteps outside my apartment, slow, heavy, pacing back and forth, I grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver, and I pried open the door to 2B, which resisted like it hadn't been opened in years, and when it finally cracked loose and creaked inward, I was hit with a wave of air that smelled like earth and rust and mold. And I realized quickly that the unit wasn't just empty. It was completely gutted. No furniture, no appliances, just cracked concrete floors and clawed-up drywall where someone had carved again and again the words, "Let me out, let me out, let me out." And the moment I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me so hard that it shook the light bulb in the hallway outside, leaving me in near total darkness with just my flashlight beam swinging wildly as I turned around and reached for the knob, only to find it locked from the outside, even though I had never turned it. And then I heard it again, the whisper, right behind me, closer than ever, like it was standing right at my back, not angry, not loud, just waiting. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and for a second I swear the light from my flashlight dimmed even though the batteries were new. Like whatever was in there didn't want to be seen. And so I backed away from the voice, from the wall, from the air itself, and I slammed my shoulder into the door over and over again until the latch gave way with a cracking pop, and I stumbled back into the hallway, shaking, heart pounding, gasping like I just surfaced from underwater. And when I looked back over my shoulder, The red door was slowly swinging shut again. Not fast, not loud, but like it had done this before. And I knew that I wasn't supposed to have opened it, wasn't supposed to have looked inside, because the next morning there was a new photo under my door. The same girl, same basement, but this time she was smiling, and her eyes were wide and bright, like she knew I had seen her, and that changed everything. And when I finally got the landlord on the phone, he sounded groggy and half sober, and told me that Unit 2B had been sealed for years, ever since. The last guy lost it down there. But when I pressed him for details, he just said, "You should stay out of that one," and hung up on me. I moved out 4 days later. Didn't tell anyone what happened. Didn't mention the photos or the voice or the scratches on the wall. But to this day, I can still hear the whisper sometimes, soft and thin, like it is buried beneath whatever town I'm in now. And I haven't lived on a basement floor since. Won't even take an Airbnb that's partially underground. Because sometimes late at night, when everything's quiet and I've got the lights off, I'll remember how it felt to stand in that gutted room, with all those desperate words clawed into the walls. And I'll wonder how many people that little red door has seen come and go, and whether the girl in the picture is still down there, smiling in the dark, waiting for someone else to open it again.